Morning, we're going to continue in our Exodus series. Have you been learning something? Wait, I did it again this week, didn't I? I've just been just been loving this time. The Lord has just been taking us deep in understanding really what it means to get free and what it means to stay free. I been a Christian most of my life. Heard stories from the book of Exodus most of my life. But it's been remarkable during this deep dive, the way the Lord has just really revealed things to me that I had never seen before. The idea that the book of Exodus is an explanation, if you will, or a demonstration of the gospel in the Old Testament. And it's been so rich because it's caused me to understand the gospel in the New Testament in such a deeper way. As we've been learning together, we've been talking about the fact that many people return to patterns of slavery because they have never learned to be free. I've thought a lot about this statement. We've repeated it throughout the series because I've shared this a couple times. I've watched throughout the course of my life, as especially growing up in and around the church, a very spiritual church where people would have moments of deliverance or freedom or very emotional responses, but then cycle back to the same things that held their life captive up till those points. I've even experienced that myself. Maybe you don't want to raise your hand, but probably if there are a lot of us in this room, were to be honest, we could admit that there have been times in our life where maybe we've carried a burden or we've been in a pattern of sin or disappointment or brokenness in our life, and we've come to the Lord and we've said, "Here, Lord, I give this to you," and it feels like I received freedom for that or I was delivered from that, but then we find ourselves going back to those cycles. And as we've thought about that, what we've come to understand is that it's not God's intent that those things that we get free from have the power to come back into our lives and bring us back into bondage again. But for many of us, what we don't understand is that just because the chains get broken off of us, if we haven't learned how to live free or stay free, then we still behave and act as if we're in bondage. 2 months ago, I was working out. I know it's hard to believe that I work out, but I was, and as I was working out, something happened dramatically to me. You may recall on a Sunday I was wearing a sling a couple months ago. I was working out and a muscle tore in my arm. Now, it's not because I was lifting really heavy weights. It's most likely just because I'm getting old. I don't know. But it's okay. You can laugh at that. It's fine. The doctor really had no explanation. He said, "Look, you could have had an injury at some other time in your life, could have created a weak spot, blah, blah, blah." No, it wasn't like I was doing anything extraordinary. Like I said, wasn't lifting extremely heavy weights. It's very obvious that that's not something that's ever been a part of my life. But I was doing the best I could, but the muscle tore. And it's been a couple of months now, and at the time that it happened, there was a couple weeks there where they were trying to see what all could be wrong with me, and we had a lot of scans done just to make sure there was no other damage. And the doctor basically said, "Look, after this muscle tore, you can wait a couple of months, and then you can start to exercise again. We're never gonna reattach that muscle. If we do, it's not gonna work. It's just gonna be aesthetics." And clearly, I don't care about that. So I'm just, again, you can laugh. It's okay. I'm trying to be funny, guys. He's like, "Look, you can just go on, and after a couple months, you can start working out again." But what I've noticed in the last couple of weeks, as I've tried to get back into my workout routine, is every time I try to go back and start to work out again, there's just like a block. There's like a mental block because I go back to that traumatic moment. And it was traumatic. I mean, I was right in the middle of a lift. I heard the muscle literally pop. I heard it tear. and then I felt it. And I went to the floor, and I laid there for 5 minutes, not because I was in pain, but because I didn't want to go tell Desiree that I hurt myself, because I knew I was going to get in trouble for overdoing it. And so I was laying there trying to figure out how I was going to tell her, and hoping that it wasn't what I thought it was. And that trauma, and then subsequently the couple of months of not using that muscle has created a block in my life. And when I try to go back to being free, when I try to go to that place of living and functioning and operating, and certainly there's still healing going on in my body, but according to the doctor and all the scans, I should be able to live free. I should be able to function a certain way, but I'm finding it very, very difficult to go back to that place because that trauma marked me. And listen, there are a lot of people in this room who've experienced a lot of traumas, far different and far more difficult than just tearing a biceps. There's plenty of people, and sometimes I think that we need to spend more time listening to one another and getting to know one another, because we probably have a lot more grace for people if we heard their stories, because you probably are not aware of the trauma that sits in this room. You're probably not aware of the battles that people have fought and the scars that people are living with. And those battles and those scars and those traumas, whatever word you might want to use, condition us. They set limits on us emotionally, and I would suggest they set limits on us spiritually. And oftentimes we come to church and we experience moments, and we hear preaching, and we're like, why? And we're like, why don't I get it? Or why doesn't this person just get it? Why don't they live free? But it's possible, and I believe most of us, if we're really honest, would understand. Sometimes things happen in our life, and it creates such a block that it becomes difficult, and you have to unlearn the trauma. You have to unlearn what it meant to live. Like in my case, I'm having to unlearn what it meant to function with my arm the way I did while I was protecting it when it was hurt. I'm having to unlearn the belief that if I lift something a certain way that my muscle's going to tear again. Are you with me? For the children of Israel, as they were coming out of Egyptian bondage, I don't know if you've ever read the Pentateuch, the first 5 books of the Bible, and really read about the children of Israel. I mean, these people were hard-headed. They were thick-headed. They were stubborn. Not long after, we've been looking at Exodus chapter 20 for a long time now, right? They're at this moment, they're meeting God, fire, thunder, lightning, all of this stuff. They have this like incredible, dramatic experience with God. We've been talking about it over the last few weeks. God reveals himself to them. He tells them their name. He tells them very specifically, don't be involved in idol worship. Don't be involved in doing any of the things that you saw going on in Egypt. I talked about this last week. And just a couple of chapters later, Moses goes back on the mountain to get more instructions from God. He's only been gone for less than 40 days. And these people decide, oh, you know what? Yeah, there's that thunder and lightning and fire and shaking of the mountain, but let's just go back and worship the way we used to. I mean, they explicitly and specifically do the opposite of what God had told them to do just a few days ago. They had been wandering in the wilderness. God had been giving them manna every day. God had been taking care of them. He had just delivered them from Egypt, parted a Red Sea, had been leading them and doing incredible things in their life. I mean, it could not have been clearer to them. And yet, they immediately went back to idol worship. Why? Because it was ingrained in them. That's all they knew. And I wonder how many of us do not realize how much all we do is what we've always known. And when God brings us into his kingdom, the process of becoming a disciple is us unlearning what we used to do. The reason we're doing a Money Matters, Money Matters discipleship pathway is I know what some of you are thinking. Some of you are like, oh, yeah, I know what I'm going to do. I know they're going to go there, and they're just going to gripe at me for not tithing. Some of you had that thought. Would you like to raise your hand to tell? I'm just kidding. Don't do it. But some of you had that thought because that's been your experience at every church you've ever gone to. is that every time they talk about money, the only reason they talk about money is so they can get more money from you. And so immediately you thought, oh, that's the motivation. I'm not going to that one. Because all you've been taught is that you are to be exploited and extracted from, not understanding that Jesus talked about money just about as much or more than he talked about anything else. Why? Because what you and I do with our resources defines and expresses what's going on in our heart. So Jesus was really concerned about it, not so he could get it from you, but because he knew that's how the system had controlled you all along. And so the scripture is full of information teaching you and I about how we handle our resources, because God doesn't want us to be slaves in the kingdoms of this world. He wants us to be sons and daughters in his kingdom. And he knows the way the kingdoms of this world has held us in slavery is through how we use our resources. So we're doing a discipleship pathway about how we handle our money, is because a lot of you are in debt, and you've come to believe, because the financial institutions of this world have taught you that you have to be in debt, and that's the only way to get ahead. That's how the institutions of this world keep you in slavery. And you go to financial classes through the systems of this world, and they teach you debt is a tool and it's a way that you build wealth. Why? Because they want to keep you in slavery. So we're doing a discipleship pathway on biblical principles around finances so that you and I can learn how kingdom finances work, not so we can get something from you. So I want to invite you to come be a part of that discipleship pathway, because some of us have to unlearn what the systems of this world has taught us, because the systems of this world are determined and designed to keep us in slavery. It's a good place to say amen. We've been talking about the 10 Commandments. The first commandment dealt with false gods. The second commandment dealt with false worship. And the third commandment, which we talked about last week, dealt with how we misuse or not misusing God's name. Using God's name, and we talked about it at length last week. If you weren't here, you can go to the website, or you can go to YouTube and listen to it. I'd highly encourage you to do so, because what religious people have done and what the church has done has reduced that commandment, just like it reduces God, to make it about legalism and something we can control. Just don't say this cuss word and you're good. When in reality, what using God's name in vain was about was using God's name as a way to gain advantage. And when we do that, that's an assault on God's glory. So when I use God's name as a way to manipulate or to control you, or to manipulate or control my children, or manipulate or control a business partner or a colleague, really that's when I'm taking God's name in vain. When I pretend like I'm speaking for God when I'm not speaking for him, when I take the Bible out of context so I can reinforce my culture or my concerns or my desires, that's when I'm taking God's name in vain. And so we learn that God's really concerned. The first 4 of the 10 Commandments, God's really concerned about our relationship with him. And you can think about the 10 Commandments this way. The first 4 of the 10 Commandments are about our relationship with God, and the last 6 of the 10 Commandments are about a relationship with others. And I'll give you a pro tip here. You can never have healthy relationship with others until you have healthy relationship with God. Until relationship with God is aligned in your life, you can construct every philosophical system you want to construct. You can be as good of a person as you want to be. It will always be compromised. And God knew that. And so the first 4 commandments are about our relationship with him. And it really isn't about God controlling our behavior. It's about God helping us to understand him. Because if we don't understand him, we don't trust him. And if we don't trust him, then we can't live in relationship with him. And if we can't live in relationship with him, then we can't enjoy the benefits of blessing and covenant. God's called us into blessing, and he's called us into covenant. But to do that, we have to know him. So God introduces himself. He says, let me explain to you who I am. I am different than these gods of Egypt. That's all you've ever known. And the way you're going to worship me, the way you're going to interact with me is different than the way you worshiped and interacted with the gods of Egypt. So he talks about that, and he talked to them about, you're not going to use me to enforce others, because that's what Egypt did. That's what the empire did. The empire used religion to control people. Just letting that one hang out there for a second. The kingdoms of this world uses religion to control people. So anytime, anywhere in human history, no matter what title, no matter what label, no matter what banner that religion is under, when religion is used to control people, it's not of God. When spirituality is used to control, manipulate, and to extract from people, it's not of Yahweh. It's not of the Holy One, true, living God. That's how Egypt does it. That's how the empires of this world does it. So God says, listen, I want to show you something that's different about how it looks in my kingdom. So the fourth commandment, God starts to talk about the Sabbath. I'm not going to read from Exodus chapter 20. Instead, I'm going to read from Deuteronomy chapter 5. This is after some period of time, Moses is repeating to the children of Israel what was said in Exodus chapter 20. But I wanted to read from Deuteronomy chapter 5 because it demonstrates a nuance of context that the people in Exodus 20 would have had, but the people in Deuteronomy 5 would have forgotten. And what I'm afraid is that you and I have forgotten it as it relates to Sabbath. So I want to read, it's the same commandment. It's almost said exactly. But at the very end in Deuteronomy chapter 5, because it's been some period of time, Moses adds context to the command. So that's why we're going to read from Deuteronomy 5. Let me read it to you. Observe, or the word actually is remember the Sabbath by keeping it holy, as the Lord your God has commanded you. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work. But the seventh day is a Sabbath to the Lord. On it you shall not do any work, neither you, nor your son or daughter, nor your male or female servant, nor your ox, your donkey, or any of your animals, nor any foreigner residing in your towns, so that your male and female servants may rest as you do. Remember, here's what Moses is bringing their attention to. The people in Exodus 20 had just lived this, so he didn't need to say it in Exodus chapter 20. So he's saying it in Deuteronomy 5 because they've forgotten it. But it's the context of the command, and it's essential that you and I understand it. Remember that you were slaves in Egypt, and that the Lord your God brought you out of there with a mighty hand and an outstretched arm. Therefore, the Lord your God has commanded you to observe the Sabbath day. Now remember, as I've already said, this is a virtual repeat of what we see in Exodus chapter 20. But this nuance reveals exactly the reason for the command. The empire, Egypt, the kingdom of this world, said, you are slaves. Now you remember, we've been studying the book of Exodus, Exodus chapter 5, as Moses was challenging Pharaoh to let God's people go. Remember, Moses and Aaron go to Pharaoh, let God's people go. They want to go worship. What does he say? You're keeping them from worshiping their God. Pharaoh, heart is hard toward God, says, no, I'm not going to let them go. And instead, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to the slave masters, I'm going to go to the taskmasters, and I'm going to tell them, stop giving them straw, stop giving them the provision for their brick making. Instead, they're just going to work harder. The systems of this world, the kingdoms of this world, when they look at you, when they look at me, they look at us as a resource to extract from. And they don't care about us. All they care is about exploiting us. Guys, you got to get this. So many times we miss this. God is saying to the children of Israel at the mountain, remember, Pharaoh was a god. He represented the powers of the kingdoms of this world. God is saying, when he says, take a Sabbath, he was saying to the children of Israel, I am different than the God of this world. The God of this world sees you as an expendable resource, and it wants to extract everything that it can get out of you. And when you're tired, and when you're weary, and when you're at the end of yourself, it's just going to take more and more and more. But God, the God of Israel, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, Yahweh, the one true God, when He looks at you, instead of saying, give me more, what He says to you is, because of me, you can rest. I just was asking the Lord, help me make this really clear today. Answer one question. Who's told you that you have to strive more? What voice in your life is demanding more from you? What voice in your life is telling you, you got to have a better car? You got to have a better house? What voice is telling you, you got to work hard for another set of techies? What voice is calling you to more labor? What voice is calling you to strive harder? What voice is telling you your children aren't good enough in that school, so now they got to go to that school? What voice is it in your ear? What voice is it in your ear that's telling you that 6 days a week isn't enough? We must have 7. What voice in your ear? What kingdom are you listening to? What God is calling you to give more and more and more. See, here's the thing. We read the 10 Commandments and we think God called us to Sabbath because somehow or another, He's like the gods of this world. He's so insecure, He needs to put us in our place. And so we have to come on Sunday so that we're doing our duty. We think we have to tithe because somehow up in heaven, the bank in heaven is like running a little low, and I need Randy to pitch in 10% here, because if he doesn't, we're going to go bankrupt. We think that the command of God and that the law of God in our life is somehow about God's lack, and that we're going to fill that lack. Even if we don't say it out loud, we believe it in our heart. We believe that if I don't go to church on Sunday, somehow or another, God is going to be mad at me. And when I have a bad week, it's because I didn't go perform on Sunday. Because that's what the God of Egypt teach us. When a business deal goes bad during the week, we think, oh, it's because I didn't worship right on Sunday, or maybe I didn't go this past Sunday, or I didn't pray my prayers the right way, or maybe I gave 8% instead of 10%. We believe that the response of God toward us is somehow dependent on what we do for God, because that's what religion teaches us. And that's what religious people teach us. I mean, religious people say it different ways, but they're all saying the same thing. They're saying what the first 3 commands are talking about, which is, if I do this, then I will get this from God. Because that's how the gods of Egypt work. Because that's how the governments of man work. Because that's how the empires and the system of man work. If I do more, then I'll get more. God calls us to Sabbath, not because He needs something from us. He calls us to Sabbath because He's already provided everything for us. When I'm unwilling to rest, it says more about what I believe about God than it says about what God believes about me. When I refuse to rest, it's because I believe everything is dependent on me. It's because I've been taught that everything is dependent on me. This message series, this part of this message series, I'm telling you, the Lord has just wrecked me. Sometimes I've gotten up on stages and I've said, I'm a recovering workaholic. And then other times I have to stop myself from saying that because there's no recovery. I just am a workaholic. So that was what I was taught. It was what was modeled to me. work harder. Work harder. And everything in my life, my dad was a small business owner. Everything depended on him working. And when he wasn't working, he had employees, he had lots of stuff. But when he wasn't there, things were chaos. And I've come to believe the same lie. I've come to believe that everything is dependent on me. And I can't tell you how many times I come to the end of a day and then I've done everything that I can possibly do. And I can't go to sleep at night, or I'm waking up through the night. And it's because I believe this lie. I just got to work harder. I just have to do more. And you know what? Because I was raised in a Christian home and raised to be religious, I do my Sabbath day and I do my daily 20 and I do all the things that I'm supposed to do. I follow the letter of the law. But the heart of the law isn't true in my heart. In my heart, I believe if I try harder, if I do more, if I work harder, maybe I can make it happen. And my hope, my prayer for some of us today is that you will begin to understand that the law of Sabbath, that the call that God, the invitation that God gives us into Sabbath isn't about God putting more on us. It's about God inviting us into his rest. It's about God inviting us to a place where we trust him. The empires of this world, the systems of this world, the financial institutions of this world, the governments of this world, the corporations of this world, the systems of thinking of this world are designed to extract everything from you. They're designed to rob you of your humanity and to rob you of your dignity. To make you work hard and hard and hard and come to the end of yourself and still realize that it's never enough. Because the king of this world hates you, and he hates me, and he hates the fact that we were created in the image of God, and it's never enough. It's never enough. The invitation to Sabbath, the command to Sabbath, is God saying to you and saying to me, listen, there's a rhythm in my kingdom that's different than the kingdom of this world. I want to ask you, what is the rhythm of your life? Sabbath enforces a rhythm that reflects whose kingdom we belong to. I'm not asking you if you come to church every Sunday. I'm not asking you if you do your daily 20 every day. I'm asking you to be honest with yourself about the rhythm of your life. See, God said, in my kingdom there's a rhythm. And the rhythm is this. On 6 days, you do your work. And then you rest. And not just a little bit of rest. It's real rest. It's such real rest that everybody in your house, everybody that you have influence over, knows today, we trust God. Notice the word remember. See, here's the thing about Sabbath. It's the same that's true about tithing. Tithing, Sabbath, all of it was not something that was instituted in the law of Moses. In fact, it goes all the way back to the beginning. In fact, Sabbath goes all the way back to creation. If you remember creation, God worked for 6 days, and on the seventh day, he said, I'm going to just enjoy it. On the seventh day, he rested. Do you understand that the enemy of your soul attacks your ability to rest? Because in your resting, you are reflecting the very imago Dei, the image of God. When we can't rest, we're violating our identity. Man, I hope you get that. Of course, the devil who hates you doesn't want you to rest, because when you rest, you're testifying, I am like God. I am in His image. I've placed my identity in His identity. So of course, the enemy of your soul comes after your ability to rest. Of course, he makes you think that it's all dependent on you. Of course, he makes you think that you can't relax. Of course, he wants you to live in a constant state of stress and chaos. Of course, he wants your children and your servants and everyone in your sphere of influence to know that you are anxious and that you're struggling and that you're stressed, because what that testifies of is that you're not free, is that you belong in the economy of this world. When we rest, we are reflecting God's glory. Don't you understand how sacred and holy Sabbath is? Sabbath looks like God. Rest looks like God. But I can't rest when I think it's all dependent upon me. I can't rest when I'm insecure. I can't rest when I'm on alert all the time. I can't rest when I think that I'm bound to the economy of this world. I can't rest. Instead, what do? I strive. What do? I go searching for more straw so that I can make more bricks, so that I can make my quota. Because if I don't make my quota, the taskmaster is going to come with the whip and I'm going to pay the price. Life has taught many of us that we can't rest. I want to challenge you today. What kingdom are you living in? If you can't rest, it tells the story of what kingdom you're living in. And for many of us who struggle with habitual patterns of brokenness or sin or shame in our life, many of us who struggle with addiction, things that we go back to over and over again, for many of us, the trigger of that is that we never find a place of rest. In fact, it's stress that triggers our need for that addiction, our response to that addiction, our return to that addiction. God understood that rest resets us. That rest testifies to our soul, who we are, whose we are, and in what kingdom we belong. We challenge you to Sabbath, not because our ego needs you to be here on Sunday. We challenge you to Sabbath because you need it. We challenge you to take time to spend in God's presence, because it's in God's presence that we find refreshing and renewal. It's in God's presence that we align our reality to the reality of the kingdom of God. There was a rabbi, his name was Rabbi Kotsky, and he made a statement. A lot of people have quoted it through years. He said this: it took one day to get the Israelites out of Egypt, but it took 40 years to get Egypt out of the Israelites. It took a process of learning, a process of living the law of Sabbath to teach them that they could trust God, that they could rest. Boundaries exist in my life to teach me what is true and what is good, even when I don't feel like it. The discipline of Sabbath teaches my soul to rest, even when my emotions, even when the patterns of my life, even when the story of my life has caused me to not trust, to be on alert. It took them one day to physically get out of Egypt, but it took 40 years for them to really understand what it meant to be a nation and a people. Some of us, perhaps have been believers for a long time, and I don't know where you are in that 40-year process. I'm a little bit past that. But I can tell you, God's still having to teach me the truth about Sabbath. Some of us, maybe you've not been a believer for very long, and perhaps you're not a believer at all. In one day, in one moment, God can positionally get you out of whatever mess you're in. But I promise you, Jesus has made it very clear. The work of the church, the work that we're called to, is called discipleship, not just so we fill our roles with people, but because it takes time to unlearn the systems of this world. And it's the systems of this world that have convinced you that you are a slave. God says you're not a slave. He says you're a son. He says you're a daughter. I want to skip down. I'm going to read this to you from Hebrews chapter 4. Hebrews chapter 4, if you guys would skip down to this on the screen for me. Hebrews chapter 4, verse 11 says this: "Let us therefore strive to enter that rest," talking about Jesus, "so that no one may fall by the same sort of disobedience." This was talking about that 40-year process where the children of Israel just kept going back. And if you skip down to verses 14 through 16, it says this: "Since then we have a great high priest who has passed through the heavens, Jesus, the Son of God. Let us hold fast our confession. For we do not have a high priest who is unable to sympathize with our weakness." He's not like the Pharaoh. He's not like the systems of this world that cracks the whip, that drives you harder, that extracts more from you, who tells you you're never enough, who tells you that you can never do it. He's not like that. He's not like the high priest who says, "Oh, you just have to read your Bible more. You have to come to church more. You have to be more religious." No, he understands we can't do anything on our own. Instead, he's the kind of high priest who in every respect was tempted as we are, yet without sin. Let us then with confidence draw near to the throne of grace, that we may receive mercy and find grace to help in our time of need. Friend, I'm very, very sorry for whatever religion has told you throughout the course of your life. I apologize if the picture of God that's been painted for you throughout the course of your life is one of an angry taskmaster who's cracking the whip, or some insecure, maniacal leader who needs something from you. That's not the God of the Bible. In fact, God of the Bible loves you beyond your ability to comprehend on your own, and compassionately meets you in your darkest moment, in your greatest need. And he rushes in to say, "Let me do for you what you cannot do on your own, and let me invite you into rest." That's what Sabbath is. Let me invite you into peace. Let me quiet the noise. Let me drive away the demons. Let me drive away the accuser. Let me drive away the tormentor. Let me bring you into this place. I'm not asking you to be enough. The God of the Bible says, "I am more than enough." I'm inviting you into more than enough. That's the God of the Bible. That's the work of Jesus. That's the gospel. And that's God's invitation for you and I. Not are you religious, are you resting?